Actual Sunlight is an interactive story about depression. When you load the game, it posts its own warning that it deals with mature themes such as depression and suicide and advises you to be at least 18 or over to play it. But before we go any further, I feel we must reiterate and even insist that if you're currently experiencing any sort of depression or issues with mental illness, that you do not play this game.
Absolutely. It deals with feelings of worthlessness, absence of hope, and suicide.
So, who should play this game?
Well, I think this is an important experience for anyone who lacks the understanding of what it's like for someone who is suffering from clinical depression.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So let's get into the story.
You play as Evan Winter. From the moment the game begins, Evan is questioning the very point of getting out of bed each day, as he feels like his life is going nowhere.
There is that immediate sense of listlessness and the repetitive cycle that every day is the same and nothing ever changes. But there's also a kind of cynical optimism to the way that he looks at the world, pointing out that there's always someone more worse off than him, maybe someone impoverished or horribly maligned or starving.
Yes, but even that perspective is presented as though it's a sort of unhelpful advice that is continuously offered to someone in his position. As if focusing on the less fortunate would make him feel somehow less miserable. But it doesn't.
You're right. I mean, as soon as we meet Evan, there's that dark, sinking feeling that he's already given up. But you want so desperately for him to come out of it, for him to somehow just find his way to happiness.
Yes, and each new day that Evan manages to get out of bed feels like a small victory, even if the day that follows is filled with heartache and frustration. And I think, in a way, everyone can relate to areas in his life that seem so miserable.
Yeah, he's unhappy with his weight and repeatedly makes a plan to change that, but never does.
He's unhappy with his career, it seems to go nowhere. And he's now in a job he hates for a company he doesn't respect, and co-workers he doesn't much like.
But more than that, a kind of desperate loneliness that comes from repeated rejection. And that loneliness permeates every aspect of his life, right down to his unwillingness to sit or be near people in public spaces.
He spends all his money on video games because he isn't involved in the kinds of social activities that perhaps he'd like to be a part of. And there's always that fear of judgment and worry of what people must think of him.
I mean, these are all things that most of us have felt at one point or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just feel such a strong connection to the way he relays these feelings. But all these issues seem to be piled on top of Evan all at once, weighing him down to the point where he feels completely unable to see past it.
And yet there are moments of hope, and they give you hope for Evan as you're playing.
Tiny glimmers, yeah, but they're not enough to rescue Evan from his terribly tortured state of mind. The game will present you with scenarios that make you feel like you have a choice in what happens to him, but ultimately that choice is an illusion, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what makes the decision to make this an interactive story so interesting, I think. You're physically going through the motions of making decisions, in which for Evan there is generally only one option.
I think that's when you start to feel like there really is no way out for him. Barjo, I found this so incredibly sad.
Yeah, me too. The writing is so open and honest. It made me want to reach into the game and grab him by the shoulders and shake him to try and help him find some path or some way out of this.
Yeah, I felt exactly the same way.
It's like reading through someone's diary. It's so incredibly personal.
Yeah, it is. But as heartbreaking as it is to go on this journey with him, I do think it's an important journey to take. Because maybe Evan reminds you of someone that you know. Maybe you've heard someone say the kinds of things Evan says. And even if they laugh it off as a joke, there's just that little undercurrent of honesty. And maybe it's time you ask them if they needed someone to talk to.
The most important experience I took away from this was that everyone has a story beyond what you see every day. In the office, on the bus, in the street. It's hard to imagine what truly goes on in the mind of someone so unhappy that they can see no way out of that fog. But it's important to try, because reaching out to them could be just that little glimmer of hope that succeeds in piercing through that fog.
This was a tough game to review, Barjo, and I don't really feel comfortable scoring it because I just don't think that this is an experience that can be quantified by a number, to be honest. But I will recommend it for anyone willing to experience the thoughts and actions of someone who's fallen into a dark place and can't get out. If anything, just to help us be better friends, neighbours, and family members to the people around us.
Yes, I think that's a good way to look at it.